Walter Beeler, the Ithaca College Band, and the session on band rehearsal techniques.
We've been asked to give our ideas on rehearsal techniques, and I suppose in general our ideas are all the same. Yours and mine, we attempt to find out what's wrong and attempt to do something about it. We have taken little excerpts from pieces that seem to illustrate problems in the various fundamentals, and the first of which is consideration of band tone, which in our thinking is of utmost and primary importance, because until we get what we call a good basic band tone, there isn't any point in going on with anything else. Now, by and large, this demonstration has to be a setup. It would have been too risky the other way to take a piece and wonder whether certain problems were going to develop, and probably would have been a great waste of time. So I will admit the whole thing has been prepared, but I think it is very real, and these rights and wrongs and attempted rights that we will play for you are very real situations. We will start with a little scale passage from the Leonard Smith Harmonized Scale Book. We're very much in favor of the use of this thing with all of our bands. We use it every day to develop band tone and intonation, tonality. I'd like to distinguish between intonation and tonality in my way of thinking. Intonation being that state that you arrive with the use of a stroboscope, the tonality being key sense. I think the Leonard Smith scale books do teach key sense rather well, and of course band tone. It's my thought that most tonality problems arise, or intonation problems arise, because the people aren't aware of the actual sound that is coming out of the instrument. I've found in working with clinics, raw youngsters from very badly developed, underdeveloped sections, that almost all clinic bands can sing a chord in tune, no matter how badly they play. And obviously then, if we can tie up the thing they hear inside with the thing they are producing on the outside, we will probably be much more successful in getting them to play in tune. So, with our bands, I like to have them play along until the chord is obviously badly out of tune, have them stop and sing their note of the chord, and then try to match the instrument to the note they're singing. Too often, with the exception of string players and trombonists, people are inclined to accept the note that was sent them by the con instrument company. This is D, therefore this is D, and the heck with it, you know. I felt that very much when I used to play baritone and no trombone. I was satisfied pretty well with the instrument, but the more trombone you play, the more you are dissatisfied with the baritone. But our problems largely then are with these people with the keyed and fingered and valved instruments. They simply haven't had to develop their ears to the extent that the trombonists and string people have. But by singing, you can make them realize, in effect, how bad is the instrument that they play, and that's what we try to do, to make them dissatisfied with the horn. And as soon as they begin to be really dissatisfied with it and realize how approximate are all of these instruments, that we don't have any trouble. Now, there are many ideas of what a band tone is, I guess. I mean a basic general band sound, and every director has his own. But we're going to try to demonstrate two kinds of tone, a rather careless, brash, free sound, and then a rather better controlled tone in this scale. The first one, we're going to play a few measures of a rather hard, thoughtless tone. Well. Scales as such then is of no particular value. You can play this scale till you die, and it wouldn't improve the band tone any unless you called upon them to improve the tone. So we'll try to get a more round, relaxed, soft concept now. See whether it can tell any difference. We're always a little curious ourselves at this time. In general, this is what I would like to think of as being a rather relaxed, around, decent band sound. Some years we have different band tones than other years, depending on the experience of the players, so I suppose we have one specific tone, but that's the one that I would recommend in a rough manner, because you don't tire of it. The first tone, I'm afraid you get tired of, and in many contests we hear bands that completely exhaust us with the intensity and enthusiasm of the sound. It seems to me most of the time you must have a rather relaxed tone going. Now we'll demonstrate that tone in a little chorale from Portrait of the Lady. I think this comes next. It's a sort of a brass and low reed chorale. These glasses, you know, my arms aren't long enough to read what's going on. We have some upper register reed work here from the West Point Symphony. First we're going to play this little passage in a light sort of scherzo-ish tone, and then we're going to play it rather heavily in a couple of other ways. But first we'll play it in a sort of acceptable way, I hope. Too often, I think band clarinetists and reeds, particularly in the higher registers, are inclined to play much too loudly and to force the sound, probably in an effort to get up over the brass. It's my opinion that reed instruments just can't play very loudly successfully, and that they shouldn't try. We have now a little demonstration of a forced heavy quality, the kind of thing probably you might have noticed one time in your band. This thing, while you might be able to stand it for a measure or two, I think it would probably get on your nerves if you had to listen very long. So we try to keep that kind of sound to a minimum. Now, here's a little problem in band reed balance. Too often I think our first chair people have a sense of responsibility, and perhaps our under chair people do not, and it results in a sound like this, where the top deck is much out of balance with the other. This is the normal condition, I feel, in other words. Seems to me, to get what we call balance, that actually you have to have a good deal more on the low register part in octaves than you do in the high. And I would stress then, to get a fuller sound in your band, that you have the lower people fill up considerably and keep the top people down. It gives it a depth. It may not carry quite as far, but most bands, they'd be able to be heard at the back of an auditorium anyway, so that isn't much of an item. Now we'll try to fill up the low register a little and see if it gives it any depth. Now, in general, that's the way I like to work with the band anyway, to get the band tone, to build it always from the bottom, because you never have very much trouble hearing the top voices. We'll have a little demonstration of that by the section, three-part work a little later on. It's a little more easily heard there. Let's see, now we're going to play a little excerpt of a march called Ides of March, written by Mr. Moore. I'm sure it's all of our experience that bands play marches in a very coarse, boisterous, heavy way, and thereby probably kill off a lot of the potential spirit of them. It's very hard to make a band restrain. I had a wonderful band down on the island recently at one of the county festivals, And they were quite responsive, wonderful players, but they simply would not calm down when they played the march. There were too many years built up in too many cases. A march had to be blown, and it was the feeling, and believe me, they did, and I never did succeed in taming it down. I did succeed in turning this cornet section to the side and making it blow into the wind, and that was the only thing that calmed down the tone. So we did end up with a solo cornet section sitting here blowing even a little to the back. That was our way of getting dynamics. All right, we'll play a little of this heavily and then tame it down a bit. Accents and articulation and rhythm to bring about a condition of brightness rather than volume, that it'll be definitely more musical. The more I think of it, that's a kind of a poor tune to demonstrate what I'm talking about, but maybe you get the idea. Now we'll talk about the problems in rhythm. I wrote here a definition which may or may not satisfy you, that rhythm is the movement of beats within a measure and of notes within a beat. We have these two problems that give us trouble. The ignoring of anything but the principal beat, and maybe even that in rhythm. And certainly the lack of realization of the relationship between note values. It's one thing to say that a quarter note gets 2 beats and an eighth, a quarter gets a beat and an eighth note is half a beat. But the thing, of course, that has to be sold is that when one plays the quarter, he must hear the 2/8 or he will not possibly be able to come into the next beat on time. In other words, rhythm is a kinesthetic thing. It's a muscular thing. It has nothing to do with the mentalities. And I don't think we should approach it through the mind, but rather through the body. It's a form of eurythmics applied to the instrument, in other words. We'll play just a little passage here from the scale. We just played a minute ago, and have half the band play eighths and the other half quarters, with the idea of trying to demonstrate the flow of the eighth notes through the quarters. So it goes, but it's been certainly my experience with youngsters that the lack of knowledge of this one little item has caused me more trouble in preparing clinic concerts than all things put together, because it's the thing we call good or bad ensemble. You know, of course, you remember that the NBC orchestra played without a conductor recently, a couple years ago, and this obviously could not have been possible without this very thing. Whether or not they thought of it in these terms isn't important. Nevertheless, they were doing just this. I think that rhythm is a very unnatural thing. I think that pitch discrimination, it's my experience, seemed to be a very natural inherited trait, ability. Certainly rhythm is not. I've never found anyone, or very few, that had natural rhythm. So I think we have to develop it through eurythmics. And logically, the best place would seem to be to develop it in the singing rather than the playing, if only that it eliminates some of the problems at hand. I wish I could take this band now and sing with them for a month, do solfege. They need it. Most bands I've ever conducted need it badly. And I wish that we might have an hour a day of it in our college if the schedule permitted, because obviously if one can eliminate problems without the instrument, you will have that much less to think about But you can have your band do a great deal of singing and this sort of thing, I think, and with good results. Almost never, after all, does the youngster forget that he has an instrument in his hand. He isn't old enough to forget. And the minute he remembers or thinks of the instrument, his musicianship is going to fly out the window because the two just don't go together. But he can think in terms of musicianship better without the horn in his arm. So I'm for a singing band, and the older I get, the more I realize the necessity of doing these things from the inside out, as it were, rather than cramming them down via the instrument. This is a little introduction to a march. We're going to have the cornet section play it. It says here first, loosely, ignoring the second beats and measures, and then with an observing of both beats. In other words, I think the first exhibition is a very typical one that we hear in our younger organizations. It's just business of playing notes like one would play typewriter. And we'll try it. Whether it shows up or not, and I don't care whether it shows up, is that the second time they must be aware of the two beats in measure. The first time they were to have been aware of only one, and I think this is the way I actually play. That wasn't quite nondescript enough the first time. They had done it much better than just a wandering, which can be brought into line with the recognition of the seemingly unimportant beats. We have a little better demonstration of this coming up. I think it'll come off a little better. This is from the portrait of the lad, little trumpet figure. Well, that might be a little more to the point, just showing the recognition of the beats in the measure. The other is pretty, perhaps, but they don't hang together terribly well, and it always sounds listless. Well, let's see. Now, we have some clarinet demonstration here, don't we? West Point Symphony. Good night. Did I get this thing to light? I think so. Oh yeah, we have this rhythm figure, the dotted 8th and 16th. This is one that I'm swearing about for 25 or 30 years. This is a little theme in the West Point Symphony, and I'm sure this is the way the thing gets played. That is written as the dotted 8th and 16th. But there aren't too many young organizations that, of course, differentiate between that and the dotted 8th and 16th. The Percussion now will apply to play it as a dotted 8th. There are a lot of things that can go wrong with this figure. People plan to cut the first note too short, as though it had a rest. It's common. They incline always to make it a triplet. And also, they incline to overweight the 16th. And weighting the 16th will have the effect of playing the triplet even if you play it in the right rhythm. Now, this is one of the times I think we have to take youngsters by the hand and say, look, this rhythm sounds the way I sing it to you. It does not sound the way it looks on paper. It's time for gimmicks. In other words, to get this thing played correctly in fast time, actually, we play only a quarter note with a grace note. We don't give the 16th any value at all at fast speed, because if we do, it'll be too much. So if we teach the 16th as belonging to the dotted 8th in front of it, we are going to direct emphasis on the 16th, therefore weight and volume and time. But to the youngster, it looks sensible enough to try to play a fourth of that beat. Actually, what we want to hear is just the reverse, that the 16th is allied to the note that's coming up. So the figure is played just the reverse of the way it's written. And this is so often the case with rhythms. We forget. We say, play what you see. And actually, if the youngster plays what he sees, it's ridiculous. And we don't mean that at all. We mean play what we've learned to call that, recognize when we see that dotted eighth on paper through the years. We say play 4/16, we equal. We don't want that. We want triplet. Right, if we have a sound picture of what we want to hear in a triplet generally, then it isn't at all what we're asking the youngster to play. Which I think only means that we have to teach all rhythms first by ear and by rote. There's nothing wrong with a youngster knowing the mathematical value of that thing on paper. It may keep him straight, but it will never give him a sense of rhythm. So we have two problems. First of all, to sing the rhythm or play it to him and make him imitate it, rote style, and say, now every time you see this thing on paper, play this thing I taught you. Otherwise, I don't see rhythm being a muscular thing, a thing of motion, how we can ever hope to teach anything but mathematics if we approach it by the mathematical route. Foot paper, I think, is fine for mathematics, but it will kill the rhythm. If the youngster beats, the dance men beat rhythm with their feet, but if we in our lessons find the youngster beating that kind of rhythm, we're still lacking. So it seems to me that it's fine for teaching the thing it teaches, but it will not give us a feeling of rhythm and consequently of an ensemble where we have more than one play. Well, we'll go on. But so many rhythm figures have just as many problems. I've listed 4 things that are apt to go wrong with this dotted 8 and 16. Probably I've forgotten. Yes, I have forgotten one. It's usually badly sung by wind players. Ta, ta-da, ta-da, instead of ta, ta-ba, ta-ta, ta-ta. This gives it a very sloppy sound because the accent is always getting a legato tongue, whereas it should have a clean T time. So there are 5 things that can go wrong with the dotted 8. Maybe that's why I gasped about it all these years. We're going to play the trio of a march now in 3 different ways. First, smoothly, rather prettily, if you will, without any attention to accents or articulation or anything of the sort. The next time, we're going to accent it but not articulate it well. The 3rd time, we will try to accent it and articulate it. Now, most youngsters inclined to play this march will try to play it in this way, the first way. Put some accents in and not pay any particular attention to the careful articulation of 3 or 4 measures that to me point this thing up nicely. This time it will be accented. Notice what can happen if we just point up 3 or 4 notes along the line. Doesn't mean it couldn't be played smoothly the first way if you want it that way, but I think I'd like it that way sometimes too, but I wouldn't like it that way all the time. And the only thing, the reason I'm pointing up the difference there is to show that we must have contrast in our concept of playing marches. I think the first is nice. It makes you sit back in the chair and dream, but it isn't particularly stirring. Now we'll play a little the introduction of this thing, which has some contrasting rhythms and generally might demonstrate articulation, lightness, and cleanness. Much of the bad articulation, of course, comes from the lower instruments in any organization. I admire that raise in the Navy band. I think it's the cleanest low-register band I've ever heard in my life. I never get over remembering little on the trail there, Bill Caves, where that little passage starts up in the piccolos and goes out to the basses. And it seemed to get cleaner as it went down. It was such a remarkable thing because it was used to hearing it start staccato and gradually get medium style, and by the time it gets to the bottom, it'll be really wallowing. You know, we have a couple of demonstrations of low register technique here that we'll try to bring off. The first one is, this is from the West Point Symphony. The first one we'll play rather legato and loosely, and then we'll try to clean it up a little bit. This is built around a slur, two notes slurred out of three, and necessarily then you have to sharpen the second note to get at the third. This is what we'll try to bring out now. Then the sharpening of the middle note at the end of the slur a little early, so that you can get at the next note. This is necessary then to keep this rhythm rather strict and to keep the other one, the dotted eighth, rather strict, because now the two go together and we have this dotted eighth thing contrasted with this. Next thing. All right, now we'll play both of those rhythms put together. We wouldn't have, of course, any contrast unless these people were pretty careful with that dotted eighth rhythm. It would just wipe out one half of the effectiveness of the tune, as it were. But similarly, if youngsters play all 2/4 marches and 2/4 movements in triplets, they have only then half as many styles of music as does the organization who plays rather more carefully. Here's another good example of low register playing in the organization, trombones and everybody else, where it's necessary to do some rather sharp tugging in order to bring the passage off. We'll just muddy that up a little bit. This is a pretty typical sound, I believe, of younger organizations when they're playing low register. We'll just play it on the legato side a little bit. And of course, we have a point. It's very hard to play these low instruments and to articulate well in this register. Now this is a little tune, part of a tune called Passion and Pain by Renee, I believe. We're just playing it because it has some interesting figures, articulation in the brass. We'll do a little demonstration with that. This kind of thing, so often, this is just out of quarter and an eighth and so forth, so often is played with a little legato slur over the bar line. The point. It's difficult for youngsters to stop their breath on an upbeat before going to a downbeat action. That's why I wanted to play this little four measures here, to show the necessity for cleaning up the final note in the measure. This is a thing that youngsters tend to do very much, little legato. Now, I think so much of the time we don't get the true value of the number of people in an organization, and it's because of this thing I mentioned earlier over here in the clarinet section, that we don't get good weight distribution in voices. In other words, I think we can take a band of this size, 50 or so, and make it sound bigger, actually, than an 80-piece band where people are neglecting under voices. I would suggest to you, drawing, then, a picture of a triangle.
With the weight down here, divided into three, speaking of a section, three-way section, with a weight here, a little less here, and a little less here. Now, there's seldom the idea of the importance of the lower voices. Too often, I'm sure, that youngsters feel that a section is this way in importance, where the top man is the big shot and the others are just going along for the ride. Now, I ask as a favor that these people on the outside sit in the chairs they're sitting, the outside second and outside third. They perhaps belong up here, if you will, but for the band, they are much more valued there, and so it is in the cornets. And right on down, we have to have good, reliable people in the understands. I'm much more concerned with that than I am the top. Well, here's a little demonstration showing an unbalanced cornet section then, and then a score to balance. Now that we know what we're looking for, but I'm not so sure when everybody's ramming around in all directions and percussion are flying in all directions that this is so easy to spot, and it may well go unnoticed. The thing, of course, here is that the middle voice is weak. Now we'll try to fill it up and see if we can balance the thing with that. Ever-present problem, one of our special headaches with bands, and that is the overabundance of high register or of accompaniments of any kind, but particularly when they're in the high register. We chose this little passage because it's such a real bit of writing for in marches. We find it so often. Now, listen then to the cornets and clarinets in this little version, if you will. These people, of course, have a perfect right to play that. It says probably, I don't know, it probably says fortissimo, and it always does in marches. And a youngster, therefore, I should imagine, feels that he has justification in blowing his head off. Well, you have made enough arrangements yourself to know how well you actually stop and consider every instrument when you're writing a dynamic mark. You don't do it. You don't start a piccolo and say, now let's see, how much does the piccolo weigh in relation to 12 clarinets? Not at all. You know, you write fortissimo. And you say, well, that's that means you're out of the way. And that's the way these men work. And they leave this up to you, or of course the youngster, but the youngster isn't old enough to do it. So we have to explain then what fortissimo means in fast music, that it means less in fast music than it does in slow, and that it means, of
course, different things depending on where it is in the piece, whether it's tonality or tonality or accompaniment. Now we'll just try to haul this thing in a little bit. I'm sure that nobody wants to listen to this thing, but too often we find this that it predominates in march playing, this kind of thing. All right, we'll try to just play with a little less accompaniment. This march, this is an instance then where all of the first chair players are going to play strongly and the others are going to loaf a little bit, and it sounds pretty loud. And as I say, it isn't quite as easy to spot as you think if you're not particularly looking for this sort of thing. It may sound empty or loose or unsatisfactory, and yet you may not be able to tell because to all appearances you do hear strong notes all over the organization. So here's the way it is. The first chair player is heavy and the other is light. Too loudly, and you get quite a lot more body. It's particularly important, I think, in the presently popular so-called wind ensemble, which limits the number of players. It becomes more necessary than the people are independent. Now, this business of percussion. On the sheet it says use percussion instruments. I didn't say that. She copied it wrong. I said use the percussion section as instruments rather than just something that's necessary to have, a necessary evil that must accompany everything. Now, we have the typical example here then, I guess, of heavy percussion. We'll just play a little bit of that. I wish I had $1 for every march I've ever listened to like that in 25 years of contests. Be down in Florida. Well, we'll try to haul in their horns a little bit. And I'm reminded here, watching that cymbal player, I think this is optional in a march. If you want to use cymbals all the time, there's nothing wrong with it. A march is supposed to point up rhythm. But I definitely do object to feeling that bass drum and cymbal must accompany everything, or that a cymbal must accompany a bass drum. I simply can't see the logic of it. Why, if you want a bass drum sound, you have also to have a cymbal with it. And I don't go along with tacking cymbals on bass drums for that reason. If they tack it on and use it sparingly, that's fine. But drummers, I think, too often are inclined to think that you can't have one without the other. Well, now, there are lots of times you want a bass drum sound when you don't want a cymbal. I just transcribed the thing of Schumann's for chorus and band, and all the way through he had bass drum solo, flat, right? When everything quit, there was this big bass drum sound, nobody else. Well, I wonder what Schumann would think then if somebody would add a pair of cymbals to this, blow up. Why not? He wanted a big thud out of a nice bass drum. So why should he hear this ringing cymbal sound? We should use the percussion as instruments, and I think too often we don't really utilize the full scope of percussion instruments. I'm quite sure that since Mr. Benson has joined our staff, my interest in percussion has expanded greatly because he's brought around instruments that I either didn't know existed or was too lazy to look into. Nevertheless, here's a little example that demonstrates a fast passage, South American type thing. First, with a traditional snare drum that gets used in so many bands, and then with an array of percussion which we'll bring out front, that's shown to increase the interest in the number, give it a little more flavor. This is called tambour for a portion of that. we'll have them bring out here some of their South American devices and see whether we can change the flavor of the thing. Now, it's quite possible that the balance between the flutes and drums may not be too good because of this thing being out front. I think if they were in the back, it would be not too hard to hear the flutes, but we want to show you these things. About any of these things, he's right over here in the corner. You want to stand up for in a minute. He can tell you what the names of them are and how much they cost and how much commission he gets. Now, we have a very common problem that I'd like to demonstrate. This business of chopping up phrases, failing to keep a flow, a musical flow in a piece. We have a little example here that's rather common. I'm going to play for you. Youngsters will do if they get half a chance, and so would I. And nobody's going to fail to take a breath if the conductor will let him get away with it, because it's fun to breathe. However, this piece strung out a little bit, it has a lot more flow and continuity. We'll try it that way. Now, I'm quite sure that many of these people wouldn't have done that unless I was watching them. And the next time I go through it, if I'm not watching, I'll go back to the other system, because it's a lot easier on the body. But nevertheless, the wind people are required to make two phrases where one should be so much at a time. And the effect is, it makes the band sound tired and breathy and out of air, out of wind, steam, you know. So I think we should encourage them to look to the phrases. Now here's an example of some chopping off of phrases that I want to show you, because this is very common. We're going to play this three ways. The first, everybody cuts the phrase short, takes a wonderful big breath. There's time for tea. And the next time we're going to have the top players hold it, because they're in the first chair and they're afraid they'll get kicked out of the first chair. So the others all take a breath while the poor first chair player holds it, and then we'll try to get all three to hold it. But this first one is what we're after here. There is one trombone player over here that's bucking. Now we're trying to demonstrate the thing he's trying to show off the first time. This is not quite so easy to spot, I think, too, as it looks right now. Now we have isolated, so we know it's here. But again, you get the clamor of the entire band, and I'm not so sure that you notice that players 3 and 4 are taking a good lusty breath. Now we'll try to get them all to hold the phrase out, and I don't know what this man is going to do this time. Now, we're going to cut playing of one piece that we were going to use as a demonstration of band tone, but you've heard it by now anyway. It is sound fugue. This will conclude the program. Thank you very much.